Welcome to another edition of Risk and Return. I'm Charlie Gasparino with my partner, Bob Sloan of S3 Partners. Bob took the week off. Of course, he's a lazy bastard. I was working all week. But as he took the week off, he was compiling a lot of actionable stuff. So we're just going to get right into it, Bob. Go.
All right. So we've got a new era in financial markets. You know, S3 was very much part of the meme stock era. There've been a lot of headlines recently about meme stock era, but our data is telling us something different.
You
We're in
were,
a new
you
era.
were, you were, in terms of the meme, you're not a meme stock. You're a data provider that sort of saw a lot of this coming.
Yeah, no, to clarify, our data points were central
Right,
to what happened in a lot of meme stocks because people started looking at short interest, and we're the gold standard for short interest, and
right.
that is correct. So thanks you for the clarification. But one of the things is markets evolve. Nothing stays the same for very long. And what we've noticed is that there's a tremendous surge in what we'll call battleground stocks. And what we mean by battleground stocks is when you have active longs and active shorts basically at the same dollar amounts. They're about equilibrium. So in other words, there's the same amount that is long and the same amount short. And there's many stocks that are very popular in a lot of people's portfolios where the ratio is about 1-to-1. So for example, MicroStrategies, we know that stock well.
This is our favorite stock, Jim Chanos, Michael Saylor.
Boy, I mean, talk about earned media off the back of what we did. Holy mackerel, it's unbelievable. Moderna, Campbell Soup, Kohl's, for example. A lot of people own Kohl's. I'm looking at consumer retail. NEO, which is fascinating, right? Because that's an EV, electronic car maker. A lot of longs, a lot of shorts, right? They're almost equal. Rivian Automotive and Supermicro Computer, right? So those are the battleground stocks where basically you have the same amount of longs and shorts. Now, MicroStrategies, you have $14 billion long, almost $14 billion short. Moderna, you have $2.5 billion long, about two and change short. For Campbell Soup, 800 million, 735 million. Kohl's, $530 million long, $498 million short. And then when you look at Rivian and Supermicro, you have about $1.7 billion long for Rivian and about $1.8 billion, a little more short, and Supermicro $4.3 billion long and about 5.1 short. So what does this mean? It means that the next dollar that comes in either long or short, if it comes in heavy enough in the short term, you'll see these stocks either go up or down 20 or 30%.
If it comes in short, it goes down.
And if it comes in long, you're going to see a big pop. So
these are we should put those stocks up on the board. That's fascinating. We have it there, right?
Yes.
That is fascinating. So how would we know where the dollars are coming in? When will we see that?
Well, the short interest we can update every day, and the long interest we update every week. So once a week, you'll know what the direction of the seesaw is.
So you got to go to S3 Partners, and
you got to come to us and go.
And that's why your stuff is so valuable and actionable.
That's right. And so now on the other side, what's super skewed the long way? So in other words, what are people holding long and almost not shorting at all? Now you can probably guess, right? Almost number one on the list, Philip Morris, $72 billion long, $2 billion short. What's next after that?
NVIDIA?
It's really interesting. Chubb.
It's a dividend. These are dividend stocks, right?
Dividend stock, right? $21 billion long, about $1 billion short. Berkshire Hathaway, no surprise, right?
No surprise.
No one's shorting Warren Buffett, okay? And then AstraZeneca, $11 billion, $500 million short. Voya, financial service company, 2.7 long.
Why them? Why them? I know nothing about Voya.
Well, so it hits our chart because basically you have 25 times as many longs as short. So anything above 20-to-1, you're skewed way long.
Interesting.
So it takes a lot of money on the long side to come in to move the stock.
Interesting.
And you're not going to move it down because there's no short side pressure. And then on the other side, we have what are stocks, and you're going to love this, Charlie. Matter of fact, this might actually blow up your X account.
No,
It's going to blow it up. I'm telling you. You look very rested, by the way. You got tan,
I've been
a
working
nice
out a lot.
haircut.
You know, I got my nasal infection under control. I feel good.
You know, you got a nice haircut, you got this white
Yes.
shirt, you're looking good. So I'm going to let you guess the number one most shorted stock to long. So in other words, skewed short, most short to long is.
GameStop.
Yes, sir. Give that man a cigar. Give that man a cigar. We have
Two
one.
things. Where's NVIDIA on that list? Is it on the list anywhere?
No, it's not, interestingly enough.
That's
So it's in the mid, it's kind of in the middle.
Yeah, I could see why. Voya is interesting, and by the way, Voya did come across my the transit for me recently on a totally separate matter. But they're involved in the retirement. Basically, a 401k is huge. I could see that being a stable business that people aren't going short on, right? Given
Exactly.
the aging population and things of that nature.
Exactly. So for GameStop, there's $1.8 billion short, about $700 million long. And then interestingly, Marathon Digital and then Tilray Brands. Tilray Brands about 3-1, $122 million short, 38 long. Medical Properties Trust, again, $700 million short. And then Marathon Digital, you have about $1.8 billion short and $1 billion long. So anything on these stocks where there's pressure on the short side, if they keep shorting it, it's going to go really down.
By the way, GameStop is down 16% over the past year. We should point out that Ryan Cohen did an interview with Charles Payne on Fox Business recently, where he said, who cares? I'm not scared about the short sellers. They can short the stock all they want. What's interesting about GameStop is that they're trying to pull, unless I'm missing something here, Bob, you can correct me. They're trying to do a little bit of Michael Saylor, right? They're buying Bitcoin they're diluting shareholders to buy Bitcoin, which that's not quite the Michael Saylor model, but it's a different, but it's the same sort of
It's a
long bet.
variation on the theme. Absolutely right.
I find it interesting that the market hasn't really bought that like it's bought the MicroStrategy strategy. It's I don't know why, but
Well, one's a little cleaner, right? I mean,
yeah.
I think to me, we asked Chanos on the show, and he said, this is just a discounted NAV company to me, and that's why I put this spread trade on. And we asked him, well, geez, these guys seem to be leveraging up the balance sheet. He goes, no, I actually agree with the strategy. But then, like 2 days later, he says these guys are leveraging up the balance sheet. So I, I don't know, but to be that as it may, it is amazing watching some of the financial feeds, particularly people that follow crypto. There's just one an hour, right? There's just another
We should also point out that Bitcoin hit like an all-time high recently.
all-time high.
Up to 120, I think, or something like that.
Exactly.
I mean, that to me is insane. But what do I know? Yep, 120. There we go. All right, Bob. Fascinating stuff. Let's get to your picks. What do you got going?
So tomorrow we have a bearish call on Regions Financial, right? It's a regional bank. And we're also bearish on Schlumberger, which is, is an oil-related services business. We've got a couple of calls for next week. We're bullish on 2 defense stocks, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon, RTX.
You just see short interest or participating in both?
We see short interest signaling bearish calls on Regions and Schlumberger, and bullish on the defense sector.
All right, good stuff. You saved. I'm glad you were working on your vacation, Bob.
Listen, we got to take some time off once in a while. We got a busy week though coming up. Listen, we got great guests coming up. By the way, we should tell everybody. We've got the great Jillian Tett, the Financial Times editor, on July 30th. And then we've got a special guest on the 31st. If you tune in on the 30th, we'll tell you who's going to be on the 31st.
Right. Yeah, and we don't want to give that away. And we got a great guest today, Ben Salisbury, who's going to give us some very interesting futuristic reads on the markets because he puts together both cultural market stuff, political stuff, and it's a fascinating conversation. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. But let's get to my headlines real quickly because I have to earn my meager salary here on risk and return, Bob. You know, that does look like my desk. That's before my producer cleaned it. But in any event, here's what what I've been working on a lot lately, and it is the battle over the Fed. And of all the stories that are out there, we could talk about trade all we want, but who is the Fed chair is kind of a huge market moving story. There's no doubt that Trump wants Jerome Powell out. Trump wants lower short-term rates. Why is he so focused on short-term rates? Well, simply that the big beautiful budget doesn't cut the deficit enough. So you don't spike rates on the 10-year by issuing more 10-year debt, you have to roll over short-term debt. Thus, Trump wants lower short-term debt. But Powell's afraid of lowering, Jerome Powell, the current Fed chairman, is afraid of lowering short-term debt rates because he's worried that would stoke inflation and cause that thing you want to prevent anyway from happening, the 10-year yield gapping out. So that's where we are right now. Trump wants him out. Listen, there's one reason why he's not out, from what I understand, is that there is a debate among legal types inside the White House. White House lawyers, there are some that says, there's a cause clause in the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 that the president can get rid of the Fed chair, and there are White House lawyers saying it doesn't stipulate, so it can be whatever the president wants. There's some people arguing that. There's people inside the Treasury saying no. Now they established this Fed as an independent agency. It better be something significant because Powell will say no, and then you're going to have to get the Supreme Court to pry him out of his job. And that could be really disruptive and volatility, could cause volatility.
And spending $2.5 billion on a new building doesn't really cut it.
It might if he definitely lied about it before Congress, but still, what's a lie? What's in the statement? I mean, you really think Jerome Powell's a wicked liar? I mean, I don't know. It's hard to know. But in any event, it seems like it's a lot of money. And, by the way, it sounds like a Taj Mahal of Fed buildings. I mean, do they really need to have sort of cafeterias, high-end cafeterias? I don't know. Go out and get a sandwich, like the rest of us. But in any event, that's where we are right now. So it's unlikely he's going to get rid of him. He's going to wait a year. And so who are the people that could take this job? Here's something interesting. So I'm going to give you the sort of inside that people say these are the people that are on the short list. Kevin Warsh over at Stanford University, probably the best qualified, looks good, smart, worked for the Fed during the financial crisis on the board of governors. He's got to be the odds-on favorite just based on his skills level. You have Kevin Hassett, who's the NEC, National Economic Council director. Trump likes him. He does a lot of TV. Smart. Might be considered too close to Trump. The markets do not like. They like the independence. So, like if you put someone in there that's a rubber stamp for lower interest rates, markets can react negatively. Kevin might give you that, although he's really smart. I know the guy, so it's a bum rap. I think, but and then there's a dark horse would be the guy that's actually doing the selecting is Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. He's on the list too. Right. Although I find it hard to believe he's going to pick himself. And those confirmation hearings will be interesting, just because he worked for Soros. He was a speculator in commodities and dollar and currencies, I should say. And as you know, Soros, before he went all in on progressive politics, was one of the biggest speculators in the market. Broke the Bank of England and the pound sterling and the Bank of England. by shorting it. So that could be an interesting confirmation hearing. But he's gone through that once already as Treasury Secretary, and he wouldn't be the first Treasury Secretary to make the move. As you know, Janet Yellen, Fed Chair, to Biden Treasury Secretary. So those are the top three. A wild ass dark horse is Bill Pulte. Do you know who he is? He's the head of the FHFA. His name is in the sort of outer limits of the rumor mill. His name popped up. I want him to be Fed chair just because he was involved in a lot of meme stocks. He used to talk. He didn't get. He was interesting that he used to talk about GME and how much he liked Ryan Cohen. He never.
Bill Pulte.
Yes.
Stop it.
But he's the head of the FHFA. That's a $7 trillion agency. But his name is percolating. I don't think he's going to get it. I want him to get it only because he was a broadcast journalism major. And if he could do it, I could do it. But he's probably not going to get it. So that's where we are right now. Interesting stuff in New York City with Mamdani. Met with the business community last week, as you know, and I don't think he did himself any favors. Most people think. I mean, he sounds like. Listen, he's a smart guy. I guess he's slick. But when it really comes down to it, he didn't really apologize for globalizing it, for not sort of pushing back on globalizing the infantile. He's not apologizing on his Marxism. And what was interesting about the meeting that they had, besides him, not really apologizing, which shows, well, at least he's being honest. He's a Marxist.
Right. Jamie
Dimon didn't show. Larry Fink didn't show. Steve Schwartzman didn't show. Brian Moynihan. I mean, these are the biggest financial players that are domiciled here in the city. Just for some reason, David Solomon of Goldman just had something else to do. Now, why is that? What does that tell you? Apathy, maybe. All these banks, big banks, and this is what New York City has to worry about, have one foot out the door. They've been diversifying their operations. Goldman is moving much more stuff in Utah, right? They have a big campus in Salt Lake City.
Huge campus in Utah and JP Morgan in Texas for sure.
And they're all going to Florida, you name it. One foot out the door. They really don't care. Zohan Mamdani will expedite the exodus of those jobs, banking jobs. And by the way, a lot of working class people work at banks.
So one thing, you told me this week that I found fascinating, maybe you want to talk about, is Curtis Sliwa's polling numbers.
Now, okay, so there's four candidates, right? We talk a lot about Mamdani, talk a lot about the current mayor, Eric Adams. We talk a lot about Andrew Cuomo, who's the former governor, now running as an independent, at least so far. They suck up all the oxygen. They're meeting with all the business groups. There's a guy that's running as a Republican. He's a longtime fixture in New York City politics. I've known Curtis Sliwa. He's the head of the Guardian Angels. It's a self-defense group. And when I was a kid coming to New York City, the best thing about being on a subway was not being on the subway, but if you had to take the subway, then you saw a Guardian Angel standing right next to you, because they would keep the peace when New York City was.
I remember it very well.
Crime was going through the roof. I did a story about the Guardian Angels at the Pace University newspaper. I believe it was 1984. And I've known Curtis for years. He's now he's a radio personality, does the Guardian Angels. He is running again for mayor. Now, here's the interesting thing. He got trounced by Adams last time. He got 30% of the vote. That was a two-way race. In a four-way race, he's now getting 20% of the vote. He could win. He's close to all these guys. So it is interesting. Why is the business community taking this guy seriously? And by the way, I've known the guy for years. He's not stupid. He's pretty smart. He understands the budget. He understands crime, obviously. You should drop the hat, the beret. Maybe he's not taken seriously because of that. But let me tell you something. Listen to Eric Adams speak. Listen to the bullshit coming out of Mamdani's mouth. Listen to the equivocations that you hear Andrew Cuomo giving on certain issues. You listen to Curtis Sliwa, and you tell me, who would you rather be mayor? He might. I'm just saying. I don't know. I don't think he's going to win, but if he did, I would be totally surprised.
Well, sounds like maybe maybe we should talk to them about
Calls are in.
it. We have a fantastic guest today, Ben Salisbury from Height Capital Markets. Ben has been an advisor to many members of Congress and the Department of Energy. Ben, welcome to the show. I've been reading your stuff. It's great. We're really, really, really excited to have you on. You have a wonderful way of reaching back in time and advising members of Congress exactly why their stakeholder status is basically a repetition of many cycles that's happened in the past. So one of the things you like to talk about is the disintermediation that communication technologies cause, and also the demographic bubbles. You want to just start there and talk a little bit about that? It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. So a big part of our theme, and this is important for both politicians, but also for investors, is understanding cultural cyclicality, right? Markets are cyclical, but markets are largely cyclical because of human beings. And so we have these political cycles, largely fueled by demographics, right? So you have a very large older population, and then you have a population crater in sort of your prime taxpayer voting age. This is sort of your Gen X political trough. And then you have this huge demographic of millennials who are just kind of entering into their maturity, who have much less vested in the legacy status quo political system. And so this is fire and fuel for political upheaval. You combine that with a couple of really important tailwinds, the most important of which, in my opinion, is communication technology, and we call the disintermediation of the traditional controllers of information. So historically, what you have is a paradigm. You'll have a period of 50 or 60 years where everybody gets their information the same way: television, newspapers, radio, what have you. When you have a new technology that comes in and is especially embraced by younger people, the establishment that controls the way information is disseminated is taken out of the system. So think about during the Vietnam War, when you have direct from the front TV images and how that totally changed the way that young people viewed that war. Completely changed everything that happened thereafter. Same thing with television, civil rights movement. You go back to the introduction of radio and the rise of populism and Father Long and all these other things. You have new way of communicating that takes out the establishment system and allows wild ideas to penetrate and permeate and be shared. And nowhere is this truer than social media. So Congress passed something called the McCain-Feingold bill, which has essentially destroyed the party's ability to use money to centralize information and to corral partisan members together. And so instead, every member of Congress, every politician becomes an entrepreneur. They have to do it for themselves. So when you look at the New York City mayor's race, that was a TikTok race, right? That wasn't done by a party organization. That wasn't done on, mass TV buys, right? That was new media. The old way of disseminating information changed, and it totally changed the outcome. It's happening over and over and over again.
So one of the things that I've always thought is so strange is that it's become almost like a badge of honor to say, yeah, there's 1,500 pages of law here, but I didn't read it. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, so part of where we are in this cycle, this sort of cycle of negativity, is a populist disdain for expertise. And so what are things happen, and this is connected to the change in the way we consume information, is that the flaws in the old expertise were exposed. And so now my uncle thinks he knows as much about Wall Street as guys have been doing it for 20 years, right? And yeah, you just buy this or you right, like, and so the
I gotta
idea,
tell you, depending on the day, you might be right. I don't,
well, yes,
Although,
but it's the bad thing.
Ben, that was the whole meme stock thing, wasn't it? That we're smarter than all these hedge funds. We got lucky once. Okay, they whacked one hedge fund. They put out of business on a short squeeze, and he didn't really go out of business just then, but I mean later he did. But you see what I'm saying? They thought they were so brilliant, and then they lost all their money
Yes.
in these stocks.
But for every instance, and we could discuss hundreds of these instances, there's evidence to say that they're right. right? That the public, that the experts aren't right more often than it. I mean, there's tons of books written on random walks, and people have been attacking expertise on Wall Street forever. Same thing goes true for political expertise, for economic expertise,
Medical,
right? Medical, absolutely medical.
safe and effective. Remember that one?
Yes. But so when you
Go
have
ahead,
these
sir.
examples of flaws in the expertise and people have access to a different channel for information, right? Then ideas get wild and the information dispersion gets flat. So instead of top down, it's flat, which allows things to bubble up. So when you look at things like complicated legislation, being a politician who is in the weeds on that legislation, who is making compromises, right? That's a negative. Being an absolutist who can tweet, I am against this, this is fraud, this is unsafe, this is going to bankrupt the country. That clear, concise statement is what's rewarding our political system now.
So Ben, when I can remember maybe 30 years ago, you'd have a lot of presidential candidates and or congressional candidates or people running for Senate. They'd be on a stage and they could get technical. They were talking about throw weights of nuclear weapons. They were talking about budget, very, very, very arcane stuff around the budgets, right? So what happened to the expertise? What happened to your energy committee? What happened to your technology committees? What happened to the expertise in Congress? Is that now been totally obliterated because of the technology?
It's been absolutely obliterated because of the technology and because of McCain-Feingold. So if you think about those substance-heavy debates, they were mediated by traditional media. So they could ask questions and hold accountable. And then the next morning in the paper, they'd say, oh, well, he didn't. I remember, the Libertarian presidential candidate was disqualified because he didn't know where Aleppo was. Right. So you have these sort of like fact checky gotcha kind of things, which was how the system was run. And arguably the Democrats are still pretending like that's how elections are determined, and they're not. Right. So being good at that and getting bogged down in the substance inhibits your ability to communicate to regular people the way they want to be communicated with, which is increasingly in short clips on the internet.
So when you say McCain-Feingold, you're saying because the lobbyists control the flow of information now, right? More or less, the big money.
No, I'm saying that under McCain, before McCain-Feingold, the parties raised the money. And so if you were a member of Congress, you had to be close to your party or they could cut off your money. McCain-Feingold destroyed that, and then every politician became their own entrepreneur. They had to raise their own money, which means they needed to make themselves famous, which meant going against the party and going direct to the voters and giving the voters whatever they wanted.
And not getting bogged down in esoteric. It's interesting you said that because I was listening to somebody today talk about how George Bush used to love to talk about the capital gains tax cut. The benefits. You will never hear Donald Trump serenade America on the capital gains tax cut. And the other thing you made, the point about the gotcha question about Aleppo. I remember George W. Bush was asked about who was running Pakistan. Do you remember this whole? And he said the general, and the guy says, "What's general?" And he goes, "The general." And he kept saying the general, so he didn't know which general. I mean, I don't either. So not that I'm poking fun of George W. Bush, but it was just interesting. And then when Donald Trump was running, because he was running, I believe, on the Reform Party line that year. Could be wrong, but he was toying with an independent run. They asked him this similar question. He goes, "Who the hell do you think you are? You think he goes, who do you think I am? You think I'm George W. Bush? Try that with someone else." Like he wouldn't answer. He just turned it around and said, "I'm not George W. Bush. You don't talk to me like that." And it was like he was speaking to the people because, in a sense, he was like, "Don't get me bogged down in bullshit. The average guy doesn't give a fuck who the chancellor of X or the president of Y is. He cares about bread and butter issues." And it's interesting that, and the other thing you mentioned about the sort of leveling out of the information, sort of the dispersion of information, less emphasis on expertise, is how it's helped populism in both parties in a sense.
Well, that's one of Ben's main talking points.
Yeah, I mean, you do just make the point, and Ben, you can elaborate and say I'm wrong. You have Mondami on the left, who kind of capitalized on that. You obviously have Trump on the right.
So absolutely. And I think that they're sort of mirror images of the same thing, right? They're not traditional politicians. And so you see every election in the past 12, 15 years, we've had a changeover in party, right? In the House and the Senate or the White House or multiple sets. You had one party control for 15, 20 years, then the other party be control for 15 or 20 years. Now it's changing every 2 years, right? Because people don't want politicians. People don't want experts. And so both Trump and McDonald were outsiders, were not a part of the political system, and didn't buy into the rigmarole of the establishment. It's that lack of experience is a virtue to voters. And so one of the things it means is that Congress has less and less and less experience with legislating, and more importantly, less experience with deal cutting.
So,
Yeah, and that's why we have probably a $2 trillion budget deficit. That's probably
well, this is one of Ben's themes, right? Is the rise of the deficit hawks. Now, we were talking a little bit, and Ben, you've been talking about this for a while, and you were laughed out of the room. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, and then where we are today, and where do you think we're going?
Yeah, so I was looking at this sort of age of political upheaval that we're going through now, and one of the things I noticed historically is they also tend to coincide with post-spending boom austerity efforts. And you have a real populist pushback against sort of big money centers, right? Major coastal cities trying to hold on to capital while you have inflation and then subsequent deflation or disinflation to try and get it under control, and a feeling that sort of the people are the ones who are left out in this. And so I was thinking about it from a political angle, but what I noticed was how hard the country, what a hard time the country has after you have big spending and big deficit increases, primarily after war, but also you have big increases like Great Society and the New Deal, of weaning ourselves off. You get addicted to that spending level. So now what we have is the beginning of a cadre of deficit hawks. Now it's small, but it's powerful because the majorities are so small and the tail wags the dog in Washington. But they're starting to pound the table on the cost of debt service, eventually consuming the rest of the federal budget. I think this is early days. I think this is actually prologue to some eventual evangelist of fiscal austerity who is going to rise to power in Washington and start pushing back on what had been for my entire career a bipartisan consensus on deficit spending. And
So-
the market is not ready for this.
so if we do, the market's not ready for it, but wouldn't it be positive for the market theoretically? I mean, the bond market, definitely, right? I mean,
So the bond vigilantes will like it. I'm not so sure about equities. I think that, I have two things, right? So one is thinking culturally, right? So one of the issues in equity markets right now is that we had 20, 15 years of zero interest rate policy, right?
Right.
So everybody who rose to the top of their food chain is an expert in zero interest rate policy investing, right? Growth, correlations, momentum, everything else. When you come and enter into a high interest rate environment, right? The atrophy of the muscles for dealing with a completely different economic environment means that the market is ill suited, right? So whether the market likes it or not, or can talk itself into a bull case or not, is not the same thing as being ill suited for dealing with setbacks, right? So when unexpected things happen, when cash flows start running out, when the cost of capital starts eating up companies that you thought were good companies, that's a different story. One of the things that Doge really highlighted was the interconnectivity between government spending and the real economy. And we kind of like to think of those as two discrete things. They're not. The money's all green, right? And whether it's saving money because the government's doing things like predicting weather or counting oil barrels, or inspecting food, if that cost has to fall onto the private sector, that raises the cost for everybody, right? Well, they're not going to want to pay that cost, right? So does it come out of multiples? Does it come out of margins? Or does it come out of the consumer? It comes from somewhere, right? So if you slow down the velocity of money because the government's putting less money into the economy, and you change the things that the government is spending money on, right? Especially if it's doing things like paying retirees so they can buy groceries, which is not a high growth multiple thing, and they're not funding R&D, they're not funding advanced energy, they're not funding high value things which have a big multiplier effect in the economy, then the shape of the economy changes, And there's nobody alive who has the muscles to deal with that.
We do have a president that wants more money into the economy, right? He's talking about cutting short-term rates. Although, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, you can weigh in here. The market kind of controls interest rates more or less. It's the bond vigilantes who could basically bid up the 10-year, bid down the 10 years, send rates on the 10 and the 30-year spiking that could counteract anything that the Fed does if Trump puts pressure on the Fed to cut rates.
More mortgage rates is all, right? And that's, either on the 10, it's off the 10-year basically. So,
right. So
if that goes up,
is that what you're talking about?
Not going to get elected.
Yeah, is that kind of what you're talking about? Like,
I'm not talking about monetary policy. I'm talking about fiscal policy.
Okay, gotcha.
Right? Now they're inextricably connected, right? So remember, the plan was 5 years ago when we had sort of run out of the usefulness of zero interest rate. There was no more economic stimulus to be gotten from zero interest rates, and the plan from the Fed was ease off the monetary policy, step on the fiscal stimulus, and you can have essentially stimulate growth without causing disruption. Didn't happen. So now we're in a situation where we've had all of this monetary stimulus and all this fiscal stimulus, and there's not enough dry powder to continue doing both. Right? Now, this is not a bearish call. I'm not saying that the US government is suddenly going to stop spending money like drunken sailors.
Because they're not.
I'm saying that we're about to enter an era where important and influential people want that. They may be successful, they may not be successful. They will probably be partially successful. But it's an experience that the market has not dealt with.
So
declining federal spending, it's not a situation that we've seen.
Ben, what does so I have a couple different things. What does that person look like? Usually in the past, they haven't been your logical candidates, the people that have actually been the deficit hawks looking for fiscal restraint, right? And yet what we're saying is, hey, we're addicted to money, we're addicted to sugar, we're addicted to fentanyl, we're addicted to all these different things. Who's the Calvinist in this multi, I would say, cultural society that is going to actually provide the discipline? Or is it a what? Is it not necessarily a person? Is it something else?
Well, so I guess there are two ways that it could happen. One is that there's a missionary who comes and persuades people that a future problem is more painful than current inaction, right? My stereotype for this person is sort of a quiet, nerdy Midwesterner, right? Where you sort of have a tighten your belt, live within your means kind of ethos, right? Remember, Warren Buffett's father was a member of Congress. He was one of these deficit hawks and sort of like, we need to balance the federal budget like a kitchen table, right? So if it's not a person, if it's an it, that it is not good. That it is a force that comes in, whether it's the bond market, whether it's some sort of crisis. I'm not a monetary specialist, but if you don't get the prevention, right, then events will overcome.
Now, we've been talking about that for a long time. We do have the evangelists that are out there. They don't get a lot of publicity. You guys might not know them, but Thomas Massey is a congressman, a former congressman, or a congressman, what am I saying? Right now, I believe from Kentucky, yes. You do have Rand Paul, again, from Kentucky. He's a senator. You had people that put up a stake on the big, beautiful budget, saying it wasn't too beautiful and not too big. You do have people like Elon Musk threatening to do a third party who controls a very big social media platform. So you do have some evangelists, although they haven't really caught on yet.
So what you don't need here, So what you don't need is firebrands. What you need is somebody with middle class appeal. Somebody who is going to talk to suburban voters who are doing well under the current system, but fear more for their children's future than the current status quo. Right? That's a soft sell. That's not a fire and brimstone, that's hey, you and me need to get together and we need to find a way, we need to find a compromise through this, right?
Paul Ryan tried that. And I remember talking to him once, or I saw him somewhere, and he was talking about we just have to bring it down, not the growth, just bring it down. Because if we don't bring it down, you know, foreigners are gonna like fix our problem for us, and it's not gonna be funny. They're not gonna buy our debt, and interest rates gonna go through the roof. And it didn't, the Romney Ryan plan kind of lost big time to Obama. Now that was a long time ago, right? It's almost 10 years ago, right?
So,
Or 20 years ago. What am I saying?
a Paul Ryan, a 2035 version of Paul Ryan is kind of who I'm hypothesizing about. He was completely out of place for the modern part of the cycle. And that's why I emphasize the cycle of negative engagement, the kind of cerebral and forward-looking compromise that I'm talking about is totally out of step with the current politics, is totally out of step with Congress 5-10 years ago when Paul Ryan was a relevant political figure. And that's why he got run out of town, right? If he had born 20 years earlier, he would have been speaker for a decade, right?
Yeah.
Like the era right now is not conducive, but it's not going to last forever. It is going to last for a while.
So Ben, last question for me, and I'll let Charlie wrap it up. So I've always wondered why, and you worked with many members of Congress, you worked with the Department of Energy, been around Washington a long time, you know your way around. Why is it that the revenue producing side, because you could, if you look at the budget of Congress, what is it? The revenue is taxes, right? I mean, it's like that's it pretty much. And then, whatever pension fund returns also come into to governments, and whatever they can collect, send to the federal government. Why is it there's no either members of Congress, special committee, specially appointed? It's a kind of Doge in reverse. It's what brands, what things in the government can actually produce revenue. So, for example, you were going through this whole thing with colleges, and Trump is suing a lot of the Ivy League colleges, is trying to clean up a lot of the perceived radicalization of the faculty. We have the best brands in the world. Like how do you describe someone that's a genius? You say they're a rocket scientist. You say they're NASA. We have that brand. We have the brand of Los Alamos. We've got that brand. We've got TVA. We've got that brand. We've got so many brands in the United States government. It's a joke. If you wanted to set up ways to educate, and actually, we spend $1 trillion a year on education, private college education, funded, hundreds of billions of dollars by the government. If you want to brand and get better education, we have the facilities, the brands, the ability to do things like this, to where we can give options and choices to where you can actually lower the cost, because you're actually taking away the inflationary cycle that causes education behind in the first place. There's no creativity on the revenue side of the budget. It's just either taxes or nothing else. And I'm using that as not as a serious plan, but it's an idea. And there's got to be thousands of things the government can do and look at its resource and say, we could actually make some money here if we actually did it the right way, and we wouldn't have to tax anybody. How come that doesn't happen?
Well, my first guess as to why it doesn't happen is because the skin stood up on the back of my neck when you started describing all the ways the federal government could make money. Because it's an excellent question. We're not set up for that in any way, right? We spend the money. That's what we do.
Right.
The IRS collects it, and we in Congress get to spend it, and you get a lot of rewards for covering it. I think opportunities for risk and graft and corruption when you have, right? So what are the sources of federal, right? So you've got taxes. You've got oil leases, right? Biggest scandal in the history of this country, teapot domes over oil leasing, right? Like, we do spectrum options. You guys were talking a couple weeks ago about the controversies around holding spectrum, right? Like, when the government gets involved in making these decisions, it doesn't have a great track record.
Didn't Roosevelt try this? And you crowd out private investment.
It's not necessarily crowding out. Like DARPA has one of the great private investing arms in the world, and it's actually done really fabulous stuff. So it can be done.
Yeah.
You know, it's not impossible. Now it also did solar. Okay, bad. You know,
So I'm not
it's like
making
investing anywhere else. Nothing's going to be perfect, but at least
Well,
it gets
Trump is
the
talking about a
groove
sovereign.
it
Trump
gets
is
the-
talk. Trump is talking about a sovereign wealth fund. It's very controversial, particularly among conservatives. You know, they're like, you know, why is the federal government involved in this when it should be focused up like a laser beam on, you know, balancing the budget and doing this and doing that. You know, I just know I've been covering the issue. Ben,
so,
you heard of this thing about the sovereign wealth fund? It's not getting off the ground too well.
so Charlie, I want to ask you this because you're somebody who's very precise with their words. So a sovereign wealth fund is when a government has a surplus such that it chooses to invest that money in a market.
You've
We don't
already answered the question.
we don't have a surplus,
I
so we're
know.
talking about borrowing money and leveraging that for investments. Wouldn't that be a sovereign hedge fund?
It would be a sovereign hedge
It
fund.
would that would be leverage. Yes, it would.
Unless you could turn, I've heard this, and this sounds weird, but it's not totally absurd. You know, they've confiscated a lot of Bitcoin, right, from illegal players, from you know the scams that they've uncovered over the years. There is Bitcoin sitting in the federal treasury, just sitting there. It's what they've recovered. Just talk about using that as some sort of a sovereign wealth fund funding mechanism. So I mean, you know, you're absolutely right though. It's like we're not in the this government is in deficit mode. It's not in surplus mode. We don't have a lot of money to go around. You'd literally be turning the federal government into a hedge fund that's highly leveraged because the federal government's highly leveraged and it's scary shit. And you know it, and I know it. I want to ask one question before we let you go though. You talked about information being dispersed now, and that led to the rise of sort of the MAGA movement. It led to the Dami. But then you say stuff will start reverting back to the mean in a sense that you will get like people like soberly thinking about the future and deficits and how we can be sowing the seeds of our own fiscal demise in 10 years. Doesn't that sort of your point about the dispersion of information, doesn't that negate the sobering of the American political discourse, unless you believe that this dispersion of information through social media away from mainstream media, that becomes the mainstream media if you see it as becoming many more Bob Sloans and Charlie Gasparinos and Ben Salisbury's trying to talk rationally about things in this medium, which makes it so much better, and that will be how information is sort of, I guess, disseminated to the public.
So you absolutely nailed it. So what I'm describing is Darwinism. Okay. So you had an old paradigm that was broken or at least weak, right? And so there were ideas that we didn't think about, right? When I went to vote, I didn't think about voting for socialists. I didn't think about voting for populists. I didn't think about voting for tariffs in 2000, right? Like those just weren't on my menu, right? When we come down and we break down that paradigm, we get rid of the channels of information that tells you what to think about and what not to think about. Now everything can be thought about, right? So now everything's out there, but not all those ideas are good. Probably most of them are good, right? So through the Darwinism of ideas, some sources will gain credibility and grow, and some sources will lose credibility and be pushed to the side. Then you'll have a new mainstream that will look exactly like the old mainstream, except it'll be made up of new players, right? And we'll have a paradigm where you have 20 YouTube channels that are the dominant thinkers, and they become big corporations or hugely popular. And you'll have a consolidation around ideas and around channels of information. And then you'll have a new ethos come out about what is acceptable communication for polite society. And we'll develop. Part of the problem is we don't have the manners and the customs for dealing with people online, especially anonymously, right? For millennia, we dealt with people face to face, right? When television came out, it broke our brains, right? Because people on television, especially movies, they seem so much more realistic. So Joe DiMaggio wants to sell me cigarettes. Everything in my DNA as a tribal being, as a social animal, says he is big, he is strong, he is healthy, I should emulate him, right? we didn't have the cultural, much less physiological ability to differentiate something you saw on TV and something you saw in real life.
Well, in his case, it was coffee, by the way.
Okay.
It's the coffee.
So over time, you develop cultural norms for how to treat television commercials versus something your friend tells you, right? And you develop those cultural institutions and norms. And we got to the end of the television era of understanding this person is selling something, this person is pushing an agenda, whatever they're doing, right? Then we broke that. And now we have no ability to understand somebody lying to us online or joking, right? Putting out like humorous misinformation, right? Or stating unequivocal facts that they don't know unequivocally. Or how do we treat something? Think about how hard it is to remember how you learned something. Right? So you read something online, you don't know how true it is, and you just carry that little tidbit around with you, totally unaware that it's in your head, right? It's an anonymous person who's not, right? So once we develop the muscles for dealing with this flat information world, and once the credibility system consolidates into a few credible players, we as a society will get used to channeling information this way, and we'll narrow the streams of information, we'll narrow the acceptable discourse, and we'll have 60 or 70 years, and then something else will come along and break it, right? That's why this is a cycle. Television broke it, radio broke it, the printing press. I mean, think about the printing press. It broke all of, right? The founding father, Thomas Paine, was a wild person, printing crazy things, right? But nobody could stop him. Right? And then you'll have a period of flatness, a period of calm when we have a new normal.
And this new normal hopefully will be better than the old normal, which kind of killed itself in many ways, right?
Yeah.
There's a credibility problem with the mainstream media. It became too corporate. It became too politically correct. It became too much, you couldn't say certain things. You couldn't debate certain things. I mean, it wasn't even like you couldn't report certain things. You couldn't report certain things.
Yeah, absolutely.
That the vaccines might not be safe and effective. You couldn't report that China might have been the source of COVID. Couldn't really report for a long time that Joe Biden wasn't up to the job.
And that's what broke the old system.
Yep. And that's why this is getting better. And people like us, and by the way, Ben, is speaking for Bob, but I thank you, because this to me was one of the more fascinating shows we've had so far.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
Ben, it's great to have you. We'll have you back.
Have a fantastic day.
You too, Ben.
That was great,
man.
We can do our goodbye here. Goodbye for the show. Bob and Charlie, just 10 seconds here. Go ahead.
Well, that was it, Bob. I hope you were rested up for vacation. It seemed like you were rocking and rolling. Where'd you go, by the way? I forgot.
I didn't go anywhere. I stayed local.
Playing hooky. That's what you're doing.
Exactly.
Just so you know, I was working. Thank you for tuning into another riveting, and that was riveting. With
He was great, wasn't he? Great.
Amazing. Episode of Risk and Return. Catch us next week. Same bad time, same bad channel.